Hey everybody, this is Rod Morgenstein, and I'm on Musicians on the Record today, so hit it.
1, 2, 3, 4.
This is huge, musicians on the record. Bring it on.
It is fuel and motivation, it sounds like, and even though they couldn't see a market for it, there clearly was because you guys were touring and gigging. Can you talk a little bit about, for yourself and the band at that point, as well as for musicians who might be watching this in the future, how did you do that? Because that's certainly it's a challenge and an obstacle in your career of getting through that rejection. You know, how did you do that?
It was very easy because each one of us felt so strongly that this music was something very special. You couldn't really compare it to anything. The closest thing that it could be, I guess, compared to was the Mahavishnu Orchestra, but Mahavishnu Orchestra was more of a group of mostly jazz musicians that were plugging into Marshalls. Multiple stacks, and just trying to do this very complicated kind of music loudly.
I see. Yeah.
Dixie Dregs were more rock-based musicians that were trying to bring some more of the sophisticated elements of jazz and classical into the rock.
Yes.
You know, so those the two concepts, even though the lineups were exactly the same with the electric violin, we came at it from a different way. The Mahavishnu Orchestra didn't play any straight ahead rock. Certainly didn't play any country music.
Yeah.
And so we felt like there really wasn't anything that we were competing with where people could say, oh, they sound just like blah, blah, blah.
Yes.
And you know, the thing in the music business is record labels are always looking for something that fits a category.
Yeah.
So that they can at least have a way in the beginning to market the product.
Right.
And so it's a very delicate balance trying to have a sound where people will compare you to the Rolling Stones, say.
Right.
But then there's other things about you that don't sound anything like the Rolling Stones.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, I'm jumping ahead of the game, but
that's fine.
It's kind of the way that my band Winger got signed. Not that anybody in the band's favorite music was, say, the music of Poison or Def Leppard or any number of the bands that ultimately Winger was lumped in with.
Yes.
But in terms of trying to play the game, which you have to play the game, unless you don't care if nothing happens, that's fine too.
That's right, yes. Yeah.
But if you want to give yourself the opportunity to maybe get signed, you have to educate yourself, see what's out there that sits on the Billboard charts or that maybe is getting some kind of airplay, and then say, okay, well, let's see, how can our original music have certain elements of those things so that at least, you know, people who are in the business end of the music business will maybe see that perhaps there's an opportunity to sell, you know, some records with us.
So you mentioned Winger. Can we talk about that transition from the Dixie Dregs to Winger? Because I've seen other interviews with you, and from what I've read, Steve Morse took the gig in Kansas.
Yeah.
And then the band was sort of at that crossroads, or you were left without a band, another sort of challenge or obstacle in your career.
Yeah. Well, first, when the Dregs temporarily, until further notice, disbanded, Steve put the Steve Morse band together and asked me to be part of it. So I continued on with him, and we did 2 recordings.
Nice.
And then I think he was asked to join Kansas.
Okay.
And then during his tenure in Kansas, he also recorded the Steve Morse solo record, High Tension Wires, which I had moved to New York. I went back down to Atlanta, Georgia, where he was living, to cut the drums for that. So, yeah, the whole thing. This is very interesting.
Yeah.
When that first record deal happened for the Dixie Dregs, and then we did 6 records in a row, and everything continually got better and better.
Yeah.
I think in all of our minds, this will be our band until we retire. So,
Yeah.
So it came as a complete and utter shock for me when the Dregs and then the Steve Morse band ended.
Yeah.
You know, till further notice, you don't have a band. You know, since I was so happy and secure with my band that would do a record every year or so and then tour 100 or 200 shows, I never thought in terms of, what happens if there's no band? So I never solicited my name for other projects.
Sure, you had a gig.
Had a gig, right. And so I wasn't interested in anything. So, you know, when Steve got the call to do Kansas, I completely understood, you know, wow, what a great opportunity. And so after 11 years of having my story written from me from the day I graduated the University of Miami, I was suddenly an unemployed musician, right?
Yeah.
And
it's tough.
Yeah, it's really tough. It's not an easy thing to deal with. When I think back to that period, to kind of be really honest about it, I started questioning my ability as a musician. Am I worthy? Is this the end?
Sure.
Will I ever find the next thing? Blah 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 blah.
Yeah. All those self-doubts that can creep in, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so, so my wife Michelle and I moved from Atlanta, Georgia, where we lived in a beautiful little home and really became Southerners. It's really different.
Sure.
You know, having been New Yorkers. Found ourselves living, you know, in a little 1-room apartment in New York City that cost 3 times the mortgage of our house that was, you know, 10 times the size.
Right.
And I started pounding the pavement in the best way I could. And, you know, I had a name at this point.
Yes.
Drummer in the drumming world. And I'd already, you know, been on the cover of Modern Drummer.
Yeah.
But one of the things I was considering was the possibility of getting involved in the studio scene in New York City, doing records and jingles, you know, commercials for television and radio.
Sure.
What I discovered when I had the opportunity to sit in on some sessions, not as the performer, but just as a guest, I discovered how different a world that is from the touring and making records world, where the musicians in that world don't necessarily know who the musicians in the recording and touring world are, and vice versa.
Right, yes.
In fact, the first call drummer was a guy by the name of Alan Schwartzberg. Now, maybe you know the name, but I didn't know the name. And it's the first call drummer in Manhattan.
Wow.
You know, running from session to session to session.
Yeah.
And the way it was explained to me was, hey, Rod, if you're interested in getting involved in this scene in Manhattan, your name will be put on the list. So maybe, you'll be number 50.
Wow.
So,
Yeah.
so if Alan Forsberg's not available, and then we'll just go down the list of guys,
Right.
then you will get a call. Now, if you get the call and you happen to be out of town because you're either with a band or doing a drum clinic or whatever,
Right.
you will never get called again
Wow.
because
Yeah.
you're obviously not dependable. It's like,
Right.
you want to get into this scene, you have to be here,
Yeah.
at least until you've established yourself.
Yes.
And so, so early on, in my heart, I knew that I don't really want to do this. I want to hook up with another band and records and for the world.
Right.
So, in some of my jamming experiences with New York musicians, I had an experience. I've told this story a lot, and with someone who was a friend of mine. We met in Germany a few months earlier. I'm leaving out parts of the story because there's so many things in a person's life.
Of course.
I had auditioned for and got in a German band called Zeno, and was living overseas for a couple of months. But when it didn't pan out, that's when I moved back to Atlanta, and Michelle and I decided we're moving to New York. And so this guy who was the other American in the German band with the New York and invited me to be part of something that he was doing. And in the course of working with him, I discovered that the terms simple and basic are relative terms depending on the person.
Yeah.
So, you know what I mean? So, like, if you ask the drummer in Meshuggah, can you play a basic beat? He might go, okay.
Right.
And so, if you ask the drummer in Creedence Clearwater to play a simple beat, he'd go, okay, doon ba, doon ba.
Right.
So here I was, a fusion drummer in the Dixie Dregs. He asked to play simple.
Yeah.
So when I played pa with an eighth note ride pattern, my friend who was running the session, basically said, Rod, I told you I don't want to hear a fusion beat. Because pa with a tick, 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 tick ride pattern, way too many notes. And in his mind, he just wanted boom, cha, boom, cha, with a tick, tick, tick. Okay.
Yeah.
That made my head explode. I couldn't believe anybody would even consider like that. So it was a great learning experience for me as I was transitioning from the instrumental fusion world to the rock world. And so in the midst of this happening, I inadvertently was up in a management company's office hoping to get the drumming position for a 5-week tour for, at the time, a very well-known new age artist called Kitaro.
Okay.
And it didn't work out because Kitaro had already chosen his band in LA before even coming to New York to start the tour. And so as I was leaving the office of this management company, I heard some hard rock coming from a closed door to another office. And so this manager, he said, hey, let me introduce you. He opens the door, and it was Kip Winger and Reb Beach, who, is still the lead guitarist in our band, Winger, the main lead guitarist. And it was a really funny meeting because Kip had no idea who I was. He was the bass player with Alice Cooper around that time.
Okay.
And Reb was just a local hotshot New York young kid. But he was freaking out because the Dixie Dregs were one of his favorite bands.
Oh, all right. So he knew who you were.
And he knew who I was.
Yeah.
And Kip is looking at Reb going, like, why are you acting? And he's like, you don't understand. It's the drummer. Oh, God, we're not worthy. And Now,
That's good.
of course, I'm hanging there with that. I'm not going to tell them, guys, I'm an unemployed musician. Like I need to find a gig.
Sure. Yep.
I'm a well-known drummer at the time. Reb's freaking out, so I was just, hey man, I really like what I'm hearing. And Kip's like, look, I don't know who you are, but Reb obviously so excited that you're here. And he explained to me, he said, look, we've been doing demos for the last couple of years. We've gotten rejected by every New York label twice. We're doing some more demos, and we're going for a third go-around.
Wow.
He said, I have a list of all of the New York rock drummers who will come to the Cattle Call audition when we get a deal.
Yeah.
But if you're really interested, let's get together and jam.
Wow.
So we got together a few days later, and I was so concerned with not turning him off to the fusion thing.
Yes.
When he started, playing dun, 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 on his bass, I did that.
Yeah.
Kick and snare, and I didn't play a drum fill. I didn't do anything. So Kip stopped the playing, and he looked at me and he said, like, what are you doing? And I said, what do you mean I'm playing what I think is appropriate? And he said, yeah. It's fine. You're hitting hard. Great. But Reb told me you can do weird stuff. I said, well, why are you asking? I'm intentionally not doing that. And he said, well, now this is going back to what I was talking about a few minutes ago.
Yes.
He said, look, we're going to get a record deal, okay? And we want people to kind of lump us in with Def Leppard and Poison and Cinderella and Kiss and blah, 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 blah. But he said, I'm like studying classical music, and I'm going to try to bring that element into Winger. And if we could have a drummer who can, at certain moments in the music, do things that you just don't hear on rock records,
right?
These kinds of things can maybe make us a little bit different and stand in or sit in a different place.
Yeah.
This heavy rock realm.
Absolutely.
I said, you're asking me right now, like in this audition, you want me to get weird? And he said, yeah, go for it. I went, this is awesome.
Right.
We had the best time.
Nice.
And he said, hey man, as soon as we get a deal, we'll call you. And it was, I don't even think it was 6 months later. It might have been 3 months later.
Yeah.
Kip called me and said, we're signed to Atlantic Records. We're going into Atlantic Recording Studios on the West Side.
Wow.
In January. Are you in? I went, you're damn sure I'm in.
That's great.
And so after we cut the drum tracks, I kept coming to the studio just to hang out because a really nice friendship was beginning to form. And, those friendships are even stronger today. Kip is one of my best friends. And all of us are close. We still get that pang of excitement when we know it's time to fly out. These last maybe 7 or so weeks of teaching at Berkeley, I've flown in and out of Boston to meet Winger to do shows around the country.
Wow.
We're going to be active next year as well.
That's
the
great.
thing is, if you're fortunate enough to be in a band that has its heyday,
Yes.
which Winger did in the late 80s into the early 90s,
Yes.
you will always have a core audience by your side that will come to see you play.
Absolutely.
And, it won't be anywhere near as large as it was 25 years ago.
Yeah.
But those diehard fans are still there. And we're booked by an agency called ARM, A-R-M, and they're a niche booking agency that book a lot of those bands.
Nice.
So last Friday night, we were in Amarillo, Texas, playing with Rat, Rita Ford,
Wow.
and Greg White.
Wow, that's great.
So but you guys, it was back in 1989 and
Right.
88. Well, there were 2,000 people
Yeah, there you
rocking
go.
out, yelling and screaming, hooting and hollering.
That's
Like,
right.
it was awesome.
Yeah, yeah. That music's alive and well, right?
It is alive and well. There are certain population centers in the United States that are bigger fans of that music, and it seems it's really the Midwest.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Mid part of the country. Although, I mean, when we do California,
Yeah.
lots of people come out.
Sure.
Florida is a big rock
Yeah. Yeah.
territory. Texas.
Yeah.
So it's nice.